All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our District 3 debate. I'm right over here in the corner, sort of. My name is Nathan. It's really great to be with you all tonight. I really appreciate you coming out for this. I work here in this building. I live on the corner of Bannock and Eastman with my wife and my 4 kids. Our kids are enrolled in Englewood schools. I'm a chaplain for the police department and serve on the Alliance for Commerce in Englewood. I care a lot about this city, and I care a lot about seeing it flourish, not just for our sake, but for the sake of our kids. I care a lot about the challenges that our city faces. I care a lot about the challenges that these candidates and the people who are currently on council are facing and having to deal with. And this really matters to me. And it all matters to you, too. And that's why you're here tonight. And I really appreciate that. We have these events. We had one last week. We'll have another one this coming or next Wednesday. We host these events because we believe that an informed electorate in Englewood is a good thing for everybody. That when people can vote confidently and people can be confident in the people that they elect, that's just a good thing across the board. So that's what we want to do tonight, is give you more confidence in these candidates so that you can vote confidently. We want you to know more about them. And we're going to stick tonight to policy and procedure. So we're not going to talk about personal things, really. That's something you can have a conversation with them offline some other time if you'd like. But tonight we're going to stick to questions that have to do with how they will or where they will govern if they're put into the position of city council person for District 3. So thank you again for being here. There are bathrooms right over here. There's more food and drinks in the front. You're welcome to use either of those anytime you'd like. We're going to get started this evening with both candidates doing a bit of a stump speech. Okay, so they're going to share with you just for a couple of minutes what they're all about, what they care about, and what they're running on in terms of a platform. Then we'll get into a few questions I've prepared for them. We'll get into a couple questions they've prepared for each other, and then we'll start to get to your questions, okay? Now, you'll notice on the screen, if you want to go ahead and throw that text screen up there really quick, and we're going to put it up right now, and then we're going to put it up again in a minute. This is the best way for you to submit questions. I see them here on my laptop. They're all legible. I can kind of filter them out, and they don't take up too much space on the table. Some of you have submitted questions via card, and that's completely fine. But last week I ran into a quantity issue and organizational issue, and it was kind of difficult to keep them all settled. Texting in is absolutely preferred if you don't mind. So that's a great way for you to submit a question that I will then ask to the candidates for the second half of our evening together. Okay? Great. We're going to begin with Lorette. Lorette, would you please go ahead and grab that microphone, tell us a little bit about you and your campaign. Thank you.
How does it grab?
Sorry, just pull it. There you go.
Okay. I don't want to break anybody's stuff here, so they'll charge me. I appreciate everybody coming out. I want to tell everybody thank you very much. This is, as Pastor Hoag said, very important. I want to thank Pastor Hoag and the Sacred Grace Church for hosting this event as well. And thank you to my opponent, Pastor Anderson, for participating as well. For as much as I've been involved, I don't think a lot of you know a lot about me. So I'm just going to give you a brief history. I was 19 when I moved to Colorado to take care of my grandmother. My grandfather had passed away. I graduated from Mansfield Business College as an accountant and later attended classes at ACC and DU's University College. My family has been in Englewood for over 40 years. My father and sister lived in Englewood already when I purchased my home almost 25 years ago. My sister and I were able to raise our families just a few blocks from each other. My son was severely premature. He was a 1 pound, 6 ounce 26-week preemie with very serious health issues, developmental delays, and required oxygen. And by the time I moved to Englewood and bought my house, I was unfortunately a single mother. So I was grateful to be near my family with the loving support of amazing neighbors and the Englewood community. With their encouragement, I got involved. I served on the Arapahoe Early Childhood Network Board, Englewood District Accountability Committee, the Colorado State Board of Nursing, the Colorado State Medical Services Board, the Englewood Citizens for Open Government, Englewood Liquor Licensing Authority, and the Englewood City Council, which has provided me a wide range of experience over the last 25 years representing our community. Regarding the Englewood current challenges, while Englewood's revenues are at an all-time high, so are the demands for the funds. The infrastructure, the council and staff, and the Planning and Zoning Board have established the pressing need to address our infrastructure, and we have a 20-year capital improvement plan. The real challenge is funding those plans and those decisions will greatly impact our future. Density. The increased density is changing Englewood's life permanently. Our services, our traffic, our infrastructure have been hard hit. Responsible development should offer a healthy mix of residential, industrial, and retail. It must honor the current zoning instead of the developer's desire to maximize profit with unsustainable high-density projects. We need to engage and encourage business with economic equity. Our city should promote economic equality, making sure that government services, opportunity, funding, and programs are available for everyone, regardless of the size of the business, so that we encourage entrepreneurs and small businesses. For them to grow, we have to protect our industrial and our retail areas. And homelessness. With the best of intentions, we have failed the homeless, as well as our communities and families. I feel for the organizations and families and the impact on our community. I know how devastating it is. My brother has been chronically homeless for decades. The financial and emotional drain tore our family apart, as it currently does our community today. We are working to get new information and work with innovative organizations to address homelessness and its impact on our city. Englewood issues are complex. We need to care about the homeless and the homeowners, put policies in place to ensure taxpayers' money is spent wisely. I care about the development trends and how it impacts our community, growing businesses, and I care about preserving our neighborhoods. We must engage in difficult, challenging conversations at times. We should expect differences and respect the debate process. Our differences are not our problems. They are the way to our best solutions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. My name's Joe Anderson. Englewood is a great city. We have a lot going for us. My wife and I, when we moved here in 2008, we just love the city. We love the small town charm. We love the way the community works. We just want to get involved and plugged into the community, and we love the local businesses and the great neighbors. So from the very beginning, we fell in love with the city. So we decided to buy a house and start a family here and lay down roots. So that's what we did. And I want to raise my kids in a great city. I envision them growing up in a city with rich green grass, broad trees, abundant opportunities for education and recreation. I want to see them grow up in a city where neighbors know and care for each other, and where there's a rich cultural and musical life. I want to live in a city where the community takes care of its citizens, regardless of what their background is or what stage of life they're in. This is a vision that I have been working towards for years here in Englewood. It started on my block. I threw block parties and brought my neighbors together to serve each other, and we started helping each other out. And we got to know each other. And I thought, we want that for every block in Englewood. And so I worked with our former city manager and churches and the businesses in the community and started the Neighborhood Rehab Project here in Englewood. And through the Neighborhood Rehab Project, we've been able to preserve the character of our neighborhoods by helping elderly, low-income, and disabled homeowners repair their homes and beautify their homes. And I want to keep doing that kind of thing. It's been a blast. The best thing about it is seeing the culture begin to shift, because what I started seeing after we do the service day is people said, hey, I have a neighbor that needs some help. I want to help them out. And they started pulling their neighbors in. I've been able to help with some of those projects. And that's the even more important thing, is just to see it happen naturally. And these are the kinds of things I want to keep doing, because that's the kind of city that I want to live in. Englewood is facing some serious challenges. And we're going to have to work together if we want to address our long-term problems. Everybody's seen the sinkholes along Oxford, flooding issues. We know that we have infrastructure, street and alley repairs that need to be taken care of. And if we're going to address these problems, we've got to start working together. So I hope that you'll join me in doing that. What I found is that we can address our biggest challenges when we work together. I'll give you an example. In 2017, I pulled our police chief together along with a number of churches and nonprofits to form a task force to help address homelessness. And in the course of that task force became Change the Trend, is now a permanent part of our community and is actively helping our homeless neighbors off the streets. They're mentoring people. They've mentored 20 people, and 5 of them have already got off the streets. It's a start. We're working on it. We haven't failed our homeless population. We have people who are working hard at it every single day, and they meet every single week to talk about it and figure out ways to help them out. So I want to see our city that works together. We have infrastructure challenges. Some of our underground pipes are literally crumbling, and our streets and alleys are needed repair. That's because we didn't have a long-term plan 15 years ago, and we need a better long-term plan now that's going to make sure that we're replacing and updating those pipes before they crumble, before they fall apart. So we have to work together to address that. Good leadership. Leadership that brings people together in the city requires good relationships. A city council member should have good relationships with their fellow council members, citizens, and staff, even when they disagree. That's the kind of city that I want to live in, where people work together to address our long-term problems. The truth is, our city council has been plagued by dysfunction and strife. Because we have not had a foundation of relational leadership in the community. That's going to change when I represent District 3 on council. Because of the work that I've done throughout the community over the last 4 years, I have developed tremendous relational capital across the city in the business community, faith community, and the city government. And I want to put that to work to address our long-term problems. It's not going to be easy to face our long-term challenges, but if we work together, we can do it. And we can pass on to our kids a city with a strong business environment, sound infrastructure, and strong community. That's what I want to work towards. I hope you'll join me in doing that. And if that's the kind of city that you want to live in, vote for me for city council.
Thank you very much, Joe and Lorette. Folks, we're a little full tonight. Thank you for your patience. There is a whole row of seating in the front. I don't bite, I promise. There's a couple other seats sprinkled around as well, so feel free to come grab a seat if you'd like. I'm going to now move into the section where I'm going to ask a few questions that these council candidates have seen in advance. I'm going to also ask them a couple questions, or they're going to ask each other a couple questions that they've also seen in advance. The rules are that they are able to spend 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, answering each question. And then if they would like to respond to the person who received the question to begin with, they will have 1 minute for a rebuttal. We'll allow for a little bit of back and forth, but eventually we'll move on. Okay? So each candidate is going to get a chance to do this. This first question is to Joe. Again, just as a reminder, please text your questions in. I'm getting some here on the screen, and I've got a few on cards here, and I really appreciate that. That's going to help us with our second half. So Joe, we're going to begin with you. The question goes like this. You've seen this in advance. It says, ADUs and rentals, short and long term, have been a regular topic of conversation at city council meetings and among citizens. What are your thoughts on the regulations and policies around these issues? What would you change? What would you keep the same?
Yeah, good question. These are two completely separate issues, ADUs and short-term rentals. So I'm going to take ADUs first. Here's the principle that I'm operating under. We need to preserve the character of our neighborhoods, so our neighborhoods should not be subject to radical, sudden change. That's number one. The second part is our neighborhood should be able to adapt to the needs of the residents. They should not be frozen in time. ADUs are a perfect fit for this philosophy. First of all, when you're driving down the street and there's an ADU on the back of a lot, let me just say this. An ADU, for those of you who maybe don't know, is a 500 square foot little cottage house that sits on the back 35% of the lot, accessible from the alley. So ADUs on the alley side don't affect the appearance and the historical character of the streets. That's wonderful. It adds much needed affordable housing to our community, and that's great. I have an ADU that's historical. It's been there for a long time on my block. Nobody's ever complained about it. These are normal, good things that fit into our community well. Right now, I wouldn't change anything about the ADU law that we have. I want to give it a year or two and see if there's any unnecessary hurdles that are causing people to have a challenge building the ADUs, or to see if there are any unintended consequences that are negative for our communities, and then adapt an ordinance that works really well for our community. Short-term rentals. Problem with short-term rentals is when they become party houses in Englewood. And this is true. Our city's not a tourist destination. And so when a homeowner doesn't live in the house and they rent out their home to people who are just coming in to party, bad for the community, bad for the neighborhoods. We need to craft a law specifically to short-term rentals. These are a new phenomenon. Airbnb is a new phenomenon. It needs a law crafted well for it. It's not a good idea to outlaw them altogether because then we don't have any funding mechanism in order to make sure that we enforce that. So what we need is a law that requires homeowner occupancy so the homeowner has skin in the game if they're renting their house out. And number two, we need a tax that comes along with it so that we can fund enforcing our rules.
Thank you, Joe. Lorette, would you like to respond to that? You have 1 minute.
Keeping time. I appreciate the ADU that's already been passed. The problem is that the ADUs now are going to be potentially used for short-term rentals, and that becomes a problem. That is not what was promised when we originally did ADUs, was that they would not become part of that system. I did object to the ADUs going into all of the city all at the same time. As somebody mentioned tonight, an ADU costs about $230,000 to go ahead and do it adequately, but I don't want to just ebb and flow like we did before with the ADUs. And then I totally agree with Pastor Anderson on the short-term rentals. I think that it's very difficult to do a community when you have a hotel next to you. It's a very difficult process. So,
thank you very much. Mm-hmm. This next question is to you, Lorette, so you can go ahead and grab your mic again. Sorry for the back and forth. It goes like this. Last year, there was tragic flooding in our city, the worst of it in District 3. What can City Council do to ensure that Englewood homeowners don't suffer that much property damage in the future if a storm like this comes along again?
Only one exception with the Pastor Hoag with the question was that the tragedy was not property, it was the loss of life. Rachel Herber died in that. To that death, that tragic piece of that flooding, the home should have never been built in that area. That is already in a designed flood area for that specifically. As to the other on what contributed to it were the homes being built in a designed drainage area. I've walked that numerous times. There's several of the people who are very familiar with that issue here know that that area was designed to go ahead and drain from Broadway and drain into Rotolo Park. That needs to be addressed. That may be that some of those homes need to be purchased, and that's one of the caliber recommendations. The public works and alley vegetation maintenance, they stopped doing that several years ago when our former city manager, but the citizens were not notified of that. So getting some public knowledge out there, some education that people need to do that, some more code enforcement so we don't have things like the mattress floating down and blocking the drain that contributed to the death as well. And then we have also done an additional study, not just the caliber study for the flood-prone areas, addressing the pipe size and increasing the retention areas, but also another $391,000 study that's going to go ahead and take all of the infrastructure for pipe, sewer, water, and the storm drainage together and make sure that we're doing the best plan possible for the money. And again, it's going to be the funding that's going to have to come into play to how we pay for this.
Great. Thank you very much. The candidates have prepared a question for each other. We're going to start with Joe asking a question to Lorette. Please read the question exactly as it is on the paper. Thank you.
Lorette, what can you do to rebuild trust between you and the citizens of your district?
Thank you. The citizens of District 3 demonstrated their trust in me, voting me into office twice, and then voting for me to keep me in for the recall. Not only did the citizens support me on the issues raised by the recall, but the council changed, and they ended up voting for the issues and supporting me on the issues that were actually brought up in the recall. Two of those, for example, were the forensic audit and implementing purchasing policies and holding our former city manager accountable. The recall brought forward some other issues regarding the homeless seeking services from Giving Heart and that impact that it had on District 3. waiting on the streets in severe weather, vetting their volunteers for criminal record, and encouraging the homeless to go to garages or sheds for shelter. As a supporter of the recall, I am sure Pastor Anderson will address those issues and how they are regaining the trust of District 3 as well. That's all I have.
Lorette, you prepared a question for Joe. Would you please ask him the question exactly as it is on the piece of paper? Thank you.
Please note that this was done before I knew the question, that both of us would ask the same. So I'm asking him the same question that he asked me, which was on the paper here. What can you do to rebuild trust between you and the citizens of District 3? Oh, in your district, sorry.
Yeah, a little background here. With Englewood has had a maybe 15-year rival. I've learned between Lorette and what she has called the Good Old Boys Club. I'm not a part of either of those groups, and I would love to see our city move past that. I think that the rivalry has caused a lot of damage and a lot of mistrust in the community. But I want to take this question very seriously. I've done a lot of work in the community, and in the course of doing that with my neighbors, I might have wronged people. And if there is anyone in this room who feels like I have lost their trust, or anyone in the community, if anybody watches this online, feels like I have lost their trust, I want to rebuild that trust. And so I am accessible. My phone number's on all of my flyers, my personal cell phone number. I want you to reach out to me and call me. Let's set up a meeting. I'm approachable. If I've done something wrong, I want to correct it and make it right. If I disagree and we don't see eye to eye, at least we can have an honest conversation about it and know where we're headed. But let's rebuild that trust. Yeah, let's make sure we have trust throughout our community. I've been building trust in the community, working with my neighbors for years, and I want to continue doing that by seeing us work together really well.
Thank you, Joe. All right, we're going to move on to the questions that you've submitted now. You can keep submitting questions via text. I appreciate all of that. We've got some great questions already. We're going to keep moving through this material as quickly as we can. So we're going to begin with the question for both candidates. It goes like this. At the second trash meeting, an elderly disabled man asked if he would be billed by the city for services under the single trash hauler plan, although his daughter disposes of his weekly half bag of trash. The answer was yes. The question to you, is that fair? And I'm going to ask you to explain why, since it's a yes or no question. I'd like for you to say, do you think that's a fair model? And then would you please explain why you think that's a fair model? Lorette, we'll start with you.
I don't know how they could have answered yes. We haven't set the policies yet. So whatever was discussed at that meeting, nothing is set. No procedures, no policy, no process has been set. No decision has been made to go with single hauler. So I don't know how the answer could have been that unless they were just speculating, but nothing's even come to council on what the policy or procedure or process would be. So I have no way to answer that question. The assumption that people have already made up their mind on council, maybe some has. We're having these meetings to get information from the community, not to show that we already made up our mind. So I, so far, have not already made up my mind. I am not a proponent of it right now, but I'm still open-minded and listening to it. So I can't answer the question.
Thank you, Lorette. Joe?
Yeah, I don't know how this is going to all work out. What I do know is that if we continue to allow the trash trucks, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, however many are going down our alleys and down our streets, we're going to have to pay for an increase in taxes in order to pay for the infrastructure maintenance. So there may be a cost associated with that regardless. Unfortunately, the city doesn't discern on taxes based on people's personal needs. So I don't know how all that's going to work out, but I do know there's costs associated whether we go with a single hauler or whether we leave it the way it is.
Thank you. This question is also to both candidates. Joe, we're going to begin with you. There's sort of two parts to this question, so I'm going to ask the first question, and then there's a bit of a twist on it that I'd like for you to respond to as well. The question says, what practices would you put in place for our city's efforts to help the homeless? The twist on the question is that would prevent putting children, elderly, and the disabled at risk. I'm not entirely sure how those two things are related, but if you could speak to maybe the safety of the city's efforts to care for the homeless. Lorette, the question will go to you after Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, as far as the city government goes, I don't foresee a huge amount of, other than the enforcement that the police department is doing, the impact team, and the co-responders with All Health Network. This mostly falls on the nonprofits in the community, and they work really hard. I know a lot of these people to make sure those people are safe, especially on cold nights. In Englewood, Littleton, South Metro area, there's an emergency weather shelter network to keep those people off the streets and keep them safe as we can. I think working together is the best solution to this problem. We've already got the agencies that work with the homeless population working together really well. There's a lot more work to be done, and a coordinated effort is the only thing that's going to be able to take care of the people who need our help the most, especially when the weather is really bad.
Could you speak a little bit to the second part of the question about putting children and the elderly and disabled at risk? Maybe a different way to say that is there a safety risk to caring for the homeless for the rest of the community, particularly our most vulnerable citizens?
Yeah, I mean, so the question is about the people in the community.
From what I
think. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought they were talking about homeless children and homeless disabled people.
I don't think so.
Okay, so we're talking about people in the community. Very good. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification. Sure. Yeah, I think the best way to do it, again, is a coordinated effort to try to help homeless people out of homelessness. That's the best thing for our businesses to get these people off the streets and into housing. Again, the emergency weather shelter network that I mentioned before, that's they're taken care of in facilities where they're being watched all night and those kind of things. So there's a lot of protections built into those systems, and I think we're doing what we can. But again, a coordinated effort's the only way to address that stuff.
Thank you, Lorette. I'm happy to reread the question if it would help.
Go ahead.
What practices would you put in place for our city's efforts to help the homeless? And specifically, how would those practices prevent putting children, elderly, and the disabled at risk?
Pastor Anderson is correct. That has to come from the community, the faith-based organizations, one of which, with Unite Englewood, pulling the churches together and making sure that they're participating in some of the community events. And Unite Englewood supports Giving Heart, and those services, those have to be separate. The city needs to go ahead and make sure that they're enforcing the law and making sure that the citizens are safe as well. And there have been some concerns about the homeless and activity, and maybe not as much understanding and delving into some other issues about why people are homeless. There's some HUD study that came out that over 50% there's mental illness, some substance abuse, addiction. And so all of it has to be dealt with, and that's one of the reasons that the city is participating with a couple of other cities in the county to go ahead and do a study to find out exactly what homelessness looks like, what's causing homelessness, because we don't know how to really combat something that we don't know the causes for. But the city's role in this is to make sure that we're protecting the citizens, enforcing the law, and we can support the faith-based organizations, but we want to be very careful not to make sure that we're choosing one particular religious philosophy or organization over another, and how we do our funding and how we do our facilities for that. So we want to make sure we keep those lines, but we also help and participate. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next question, I'm going to turn a little bit to transparency of government. There's some good questions around that. Joe, we'll go back to you. This is for both of you, would you explain what you mean, or how you would describe, I guess, transparency in government? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think transparency in government means that some of the things that we already have in place, that our city council meetings are recorded, they're available to the public, that our financial statements are available, that we're following CORA and the Open Records Act to make sure that documents are being released. What I don't think it means is hounding city staff to try to get them to go a certain direction. trying to using transparency laws to try to find problems with people or specific departments to make a big deal out of. I think we need trust. There's a lot of people on staff who feel like they are hounded by some members of council and the community, and that's not good for the trust that's in the city. When there's a problem, the transparency laws protect us, but they can be weaponized in dangerous ways. So I think we need to be very, very careful. Those laws are in place for good reasons. CORA is a wonderful allowance, but we don't need to use it to hurt our city staff and find ways to find out, to imagine problems that aren't there.
Thank you, Joe. Lorette, could you describe your meaning of transparency of government?
Transparency allows the citizen to know exactly how their government is making decisions and what's influencing them. And to that extent, you have the right to know, including everything that happens on the dais. We should not be making decisions, having conversations outside of that, so that you know what's influencing me to make decisions. The law is in place because you shouldn't have to trust. You have a right. It's not a trust issue. You have a right to know. And if you don't think that things have been up front, then you have a right to ask. I think the law is pretty clear, and nowhere in the open meetings law or the sunshine law does it say in any part of it, we expect you to trust your government. It's a trust but verify attitude, but nowhere in the law does it say trust. I do not think that anybody who wants information for how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, how a decision is being made, is ever hounding. It is your right to know, and if you put in an open records request, whether it's the federal government, the state, the county, or your local government, then we need to respond. And if people are making multiple responses, maybe they don't think they're getting the answer, and then that makes them uncomfortable. So if there's multiple, or what he referred to as hounding, then it's usually because people are not satisfied or feel comfortable with the answer they're giving. That means we have to change our process so people are more comfortable.
Thank you.
Can I add one
You
clarification?
May. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, the issue here is that our city council members have been creating a context of mistrust. This has nothing to do with the law, and they are using legal means to hound citizens. That's the problem. I'm not talking about citizen requests, to clarify that. I'm talking about the way our council members are attaining records to follow our city staff around and create distrust.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Pastor Hoag.
Would you like to respond?
I would like, since we're getting references that are making it sound as if it's references to something I'm doing, and I would like to make a clarification of that.
You may. You have 1 minute to clarify.
This last year, I probably have asked the least amount of council requests. I think Councilmember Sierra might be beating all of us lately. So that is the process by which we openly ask questions, to couch it in that anybody in the intent of that, I think is really inappropriate and sad in this setting.
Thank you. Lorette, this question is specifically to you. I'll ask one or two of these, and then we'll have a couple questions that are specifically to you, Joe. Member Barentine, why have you never voted to pass a budget in your entire term on council?
Because it wasn't balanced. You cannot use savings to balance a budget. This will be the first time that the budget actually is balanced without using reserves. You cannot call something savings and then also put it in the budget to be spent. They called it a structurally balanced budget last time. It was not. Even the Englewood Herald picked up on that, it's $600,000 or $300,000 or $1.6 million in the hole. And so the paper is actually adequately represented or represented it correctly And we were still standing up there going, it's balanced. Go back and read the newspaper articles. They accurately describe the budget. This will be the first year, to the best of my reading of it and going through the budget, that we have not had at least while I've been able to vote on a budget, that we've had something that didn't use reserves.
Thank you. Joe, would you like to respond? You have 1 minute.
Yeah. In 2016, 1.3 million surplus. This is from the comprehensive annual report, financial report from that year. 3.5 million surplus in 2017, 6.7 million surplus in 2018. So if you follow her logic, right, that money can't be spent in next year's budget. So if we put in a capital improvement project, right, into the budget to repair something, a long-term issue in our city, we couldn't spend that $6.7 million we saved on it last year. This would be if you said, I'm going to set aside $500 a year so that in 20 years I can replace my roof. But when you got there, you said, well, if I spend that money on the roof and spend that savings, then my budget won't be balanced because I will have spent more this year than I took in this year. That's not the way budgets work. Budgets work just like your home budget works. If you accrue savings and then you budget to spend that savings in the 5th year, you're not mismanaging your finances.
Thank you, Joe. Can I respond? You may. You have 1 minute.
Budgets are before the money comes in. So budget is not knowing that you're going to have that surplus. Every surplus that we have after the year ends, by law, goes to the capital improvements. It automatically goes to that. That's our charter. So that's just not the case. So that's just not the way our budget works. Now, the overages that happen are at the end of the year. And if I had a crystal ball and knew that we were going to be $6 million over our projection, then one, we need to talk to our staff on why they're missing the mark so much. Or if we just happen to have a good year, then that's great. But I don't know that before the year ends. And if we have a surplus at the end, per charter, it goes to the capital improvements.
Thank you, Lorette. Joe, we'll go one more, okay?
Yeah.
And then we'll move on.
The money's not being spent. We're sitting on money that our city needs to spend on capital improvements. And the reason for that is we're not budgeting into the next year's cycle of capital improvements. So we need to be spending our money wisely, not sitting on it when our pipes are crumbling. And we need to work together to come up with a plan to do that, so we're not surprised every time one of those expenses comes up.
Thank you. Joe, this next question is to you specifically. Lorette, you'll have an opportunity to respond if you'd like. Joe, this question says, what is your view on the separation of church and state?
Separation of church and state, I believe that everyone in Englewood gets an equal say and an equal level of participation in our local government. Separation of church and state means the church doesn't get to make decisions for our city government. That's what it means here locally.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
The separation of church and state, I think, was created so that the government wouldn't make a sanctioned church or go ahead and take funds from taxpayers and go ahead and give it to just one entity that they deem is worthy. I would agree with the rest of what he said in philosophy, not necessarily that that's the separation of church and state, but I believe everybody should have an equal say in the government, just not access to the government funds or taxpayer funds for projects that they may deem are more worthy rather than raising them themselves privately.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move back to some questions that are for both of you, and then we may have a couple other questions that are specifically to the individual candidates. This is an interesting question. It's experimental. We'll give it a try. See how it goes. Okay. I like where it's headed. So it says, imagine it's 2040, and Englewood is vibrant and a healthy community. How did we get there? So I guess another way to ask that is, how could we get to being a healthy and vibrant community? You may disagree with that premise entirely, or you may agree with it and give us a little bit about how we would get there. But think in terms of that time frame. Okay, so think about 2040. Joe, we'll start with you.
So the number one thing here is cities generate wealth, and that's how they pay for the functions that we need in our city, infrastructure and services throughout the city. And so what we need to do is take a close look at, is our city allowing enough business growth and a thriving enough business environment to pay for our long-term needs? I love the 2040 thing, because by that time frame, we're going to have replaced much of our underground infrastructure. It'll be 100 years old. And if you've lived in Englewood a while, you know that a lot of people's sewer pipes are breaking, and they're needing to be replaced. That's true across the city, right? Infrastructure has an expiration date on it, and it includes city infrastructure. So for every pipe that's on a property, it attaches to a pipe out in the street. And so we need to think about what is the financial long-term viability of it. Secondly, we have to work together. I know I keep mentioning this, but we have to work together if we're going to address our long-term problems. There's no way one person can solve these problems, and there's no way we're going to solve them if we are at each other's throats, if we have a toxic culture and we're unable to make decisions. That's why we're dealing with long-term problems that should have been solved 15 years ago. Now we're reaping the consequences of not having a long-term solution because we haven't been working together to solve those problems.
Can I ask you a quick clarifying question? Mm-hmm. You keep saying that we need to work together. Do you mean we, the citizens of Englewood? Do you mean we, council? Do you mean everybody? And can you tell me?
I'm maximal here. Yeah, we need to work together as citizens, staff, and city council to address our long-term problem. And everyone in Englewood wants the same things. People want to see the historical character of our neighborhoods preserved. We want to see a thriving business environment. And we want to see a city that's taking care of its infrastructure. And so we can work together towards these long-term goals.
Thank you. Lorette, the question goes to you. Imagine it's 2040. Englewood is thriving. And how did we get there?
Because I hope we made good decisions now. I have to take exception with one thing, and this is very important, and that is that the government does not create wealth. We use yours. We use your money. We don't create money. We are not a profit center. In government accounting, there is one word missing. It's profit. Profit doesn't exist. If we go over budget, we get more money from you. We don't create more widgets or sell more product. So what we can do to make sure it's vibrant is to make sure that we are the best government that we can be, that we are providing government services, that we are doing the permitting in the streets and the sewer with your money, and that we're wisely spending it, that we don't tax too high because then businesses won't want to come here, that we don't make our services unfriendly or too costly because then business won't come here or they won't do well enough to stay. So we need to have that balance. We don't tell people, you must come to Englewood and do business. They come and they say, I see that I can work with the community, that I can work with the government, that the services they do are good, and I want to invest here. They make the decision to invest, to go ahead and be part of our community, and we have to make sure that we're doing our part. I wish we could force some businesses to come here, but usually that means we have to give away more of your tax dollars. So without doing incentives and without trying to raise taxes beyond what we need to do for our infrastructure, we need to make sure that we're as business-friendly as possible and that we have a wide variety of business opportunities, which is why I am such a proponent of saving our industrial and retail areas instead of putting in all of the high-density housing.
Thank you, Lorette. Joe, you wanted to respond? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, I chose my words very carefully. I did not say city government generates wealth. I said the city generates wealth. The government gets a piece of that. The more wealth the city generates, we're sales tax revenue-driven city, the more vibrant and successful our businesses, and the kind of development patterns that we allow in our city are what determines what kind of long-term wealth our city will produce, so that we make sure that our city government can pay for the infrastructure improvements off of that wealth. It's just like your household. okay? You have to pay for your roof and your repairs, all the mortgage out of the wealth that you generate by the workers in that household, okay? The city has the same thing. The bigger your salary, the more you have to spend on your house. If Englewood grows a thriving and productive business environment, we will have more money available to the city government at the same exact tax rates to spend on our infrastructure.
Thank you. Here's a question for the both of you. Both of you have claimed to work closely with citizens to build a better Englewood. And I'm asking this particular question because both of you have talked a little bit about this. I appreciate the question, and I want to get some more specific clarity on that. The two of you can both keep saying that we want to work together, but I want to know exactly what that looks like, and so does the person that asked this question. Both of you have claimed to work closely with citizens to build a better Englewood. What specifically have you done in the last 6 months in order to achieve that? And I would like to add, and how will you do that for the next 6 months? Lorette, we'll start with you.
Council is 7 people, and you have to be able to bring to the table the information, have the discussion, even some very difficult discussions, but you have to make sure that the conversation happens. That's not always easy, and I have worked very hard to make sure that the information comes to the table and that the conversation happens. And I have been blessed enough to work with a group of people that while it can be contentious at times, while it can be debatable at times, that's robust at times, we have come to agreement. It takes a majority of council to go ahead and move anything forward. One person cannot do that. One person cannot stop anything, and one person cannot make anything happen. You have to be able to work with people. And if you go back and look at the votes on council, you will see that there is a lot more agreement than disagreement than is being purported here, maybe for some other political reasons. And I have enjoyed working with the council, and we have gotten a lot done. But I think that we have had the conversations, and I appreciate that everybody on council has been willing to do that.
Thank you, Lorette. Question goes to you, Joe.
Can you read it one more time? I want to make sure.
Yeah, I did
really
kind of break it up there.
well.
Sorry about that. Both of you claim to work closely with citizens to build a better Englewood. What specifically have you done in the last 6 months to achieve that?
I walked all over the city to try to find projects and recruit volunteers to work on homes for the neighborhood rehab project. And then I put a lot of hours into organizing and preparing teams, along with Ryan here, and I see many of you here who volunteered as well, to go out and preserve the character of our neighborhoods by beautifying the homes of our neighbors. I've walked throughout, since I've been campaigning, I've walked throughout the district to try to understand. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds, I don't know the number, but many, many hundreds of people to understand what our district desires, what their passions are, and how we can work together to accomplish those long-term goals. I have worked just recently. I provided a lunch where our pastors here in the community could sit down with our new city manager and get to know him, so that we can find ways where we can engage the churches to work together with our city government in ways that are really productive. Those are a few examples.
Thank you. So, question for the both of you. Joe, we'll start with you. We'll go to you, Lorette. What is the main issue on which you disagree with your opponent the most, and why?
I think this is just the personal leadership style and effective leadership. I believe that leadership needs to be built out of a place of trust. And accomplishing things in our community requires leaders who have really good relationships with people throughout the community and throughout city government, even when they disagree. So that's the main thing, is a style and approach to city leadership. When there's good leadership, we can have a thriving community. Go watch some city council. If you haven't watched the city council meeting, go watch the city council meeting, and you can see what we currently have on city council and the leadership style. And then come out and participate with some of the initiatives that I've led, and you'll see a different thing there. It's night and day, different style of leadership.
Thank you, Lorette. The question goes to you.
In order to lead, you have to know where you're going, and you have to have a vision. And sometimes that's difficult to bring people along to have those conversations. We're 7 different people. The reason that there's 7 different people is because we're not supposed to all think the same. I don't know how many of you all agree when you ask your family, what do you want for dinner? There are differences. That's why we have the discussion. That's why it only takes 4 members of the council to pass something, because there isn't the expectation that we will all agree on everything. So leadership is making sure that you know the vision, that you have a place where you want to end up, and that's exactly what I've done. I have told from the beginning of my term that I wanted to follow the law, and I wanted to make sure we were as transparent as possible, because without that foundation, we don't have a good government to even build on. I think when you watch any council where everybody just gets along, you probably don't have a very good government going on. Fortunately, for a lot of the council meetings I've seen from our area and the surrounding areas, like we talked about earlier, was they don't get along. They have conversations, they disagree, and in the end, you have the vote, and then you move on to the next issue and hope that you can better convince people on your council of the issues later. My job is to represent my community, and that's what I do. My job is not just to get along with council. We are to have conversations, bring information, and best represent the community.
Loretta, I want to hold you to the question. I appreciate the response to Joe's response, but the question is, what is the main issue on which you disagree most with your opponent, and why?
I should have had you redo the
that's okay.
question. Sorry.
That's okay. So what is the main thing? Thank you for responding to his response. Please tell us, what is the thing that you disagree with Joe on the most?
It would be to be honest, it would be the same issue. Council is not about getting along. It is somewhat difficult already as a woman, strong, opinionated. I work hard. Some women in the audience shaking their heads. I understand that. It is difficult to be a strong woman with a passion for what you do. I think that it is unfortunate that we have tried to take personalities and make them the issues so that we don't have to deal with the issues. And to go and demonize me and the way I speak or the tone I've used rather than to listen to the ideas and the issues that I'm putting forward. And I think that's unfortunate, and I think women suffer more for that than men. But I think that's the biggest thing we disagree on, is that the issues will not be resolved by just getting along with the rest of council. And if one person ever thinks they're going to get on council and solve the other 6, that's a little delusional.
Thank you, Loretta. Joe, you'd like to respond? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, I want to kind of stake out the ground here, right? I've seen this happen in city governments where you have such a united council that they end up with groupthink, right? We know that's a bad extreme. Okay, the other extreme is where the relationships have been so badly burned that there's no groundwork on which to have a common conversation and a valid disagreement that actually works towards resolution, all right? I want to be on a council where the relationships are healthy so that people can disagree and come to good conclusions and have a healthy and honest conversation.
Thank you.
Can I respond?
You may. You have 1 minute.
I don't think that's the relationship we have on council, and I'm somewhat taken aback for that opinion from somebody who's coming not on the council currently. So I would disagree. That's not the way I feel, certainly, and I enjoy working with my fellow council members.
Can I have
Thank
one,
you, Joe. You may.
Sentence?
Yep, you may respond.
Yeah, my 1 sentence response is ask a few council members and a few staff members how they think their relationship is with my opponent, and watch a council meeting. That's all I got.
Thank you, Joe. All right. I want to move back to some questions about our city structure and plan. This question specifically is about the bulk plane. It is a yes or no question, and so I would like for you to expound upon it a bit. The question says, do you approve or not reversing the bulk plane? I would actually also like if one or both candidates could describe a little bit about what that means to the everyone's here. So, Joe, we can start with you. Please tell us whether or not you approve reversing the bulk plane and a little bit about why. Thank Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know that I have sorry, I can't give you a solid yes or no on this. The bulk plane was raised. It's right now, I think, in 20. I think it's 26 feet with 12 foot up from each side. This is 12 feet up from each side of the lot, and then at a 45-degree angle with a maximum height of 26. That's increased the height of some of the residential builds in our areas. Going back to a much lower bulk plane may be detrimental. I don't know. I'm going to study this some more, but there may be a middle ground that would still allow some development. I think it's damaging to neighborhoods when you have radical sudden change and you have a really, really tall house right next to a really, really short house. But we want to provide balance that would still allow some growth in our housing market without requiring super high buildings. So I'm going to study that and figure out what the best thing is there.
Thank you, Joe. Lorette, the question goes to you. Would you approve or not reversing the bulk plane, and why?
There were some very serious wholesale changes made prior to my getting on in council in 2015 that included the bulk plane urban lots, the setbacks, and I think that it had a huge impact, especially on North Englewood here. And for the urban lots, it had an impact on District 3. I really think it would be in the best interest for council to go ahead and relook at those.
Thank you. Moving on to council's relationship with public schools. What does a strong partner, this goes to both candidates, what does a strong partnership look like between the city council and our public school system? Joe, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a partnership is where we can allow well, let me start with this. The first thing is we want city council members to have really good relationships with our school board members and with staff at schools and can work together well with them. I love it when we see the students come into city council with proposals, with ideas, different ways of working together to address the needs of our community. I think it's great that Sherilyn keeps its playground open for the neighborhood kids to come and play in. I think those are great partnerships with the community. I'd like to see more partnerships where we can see the city working together across with the school board and with the schools as well to see the kids learn more about city government and see the city serving the schools in any way we can collaborate on.
Thank you. Lorette, the question goes to you. City council's relationship with public schools.
I got on the liaison for the school with council in school because I was horrified that we were charging our school district tax. They are a government entity and they are tax exempt. The previous councils, when they had done the high school and the middle school, garnered another $600,000 of your tax dollars and siphoned it away from the schools to put under their control. I disagree with that. I worked very hard at the beginning with the superintendent and with the school board to prevent the city from siphoning off $1.6 million of the bond issue that needed to go to the schools, that you voted for to go to the schools, to not be siphoned off by the city. I was instrumental in making ordinance changes so that we no longer siphon off money from your bond issues. We have no right to do that. That's inappropriate for us to do. And I've fought hard to stick to the law. And the other issues would be that the city at least understand its boundaries in dealing with the school. When they built Sherilyn, they wanted to impose some additional drainage on them. And they have to understand that they get their permitting from the state. We need to make sure that we are not overstepping our bounds, that we let that government entity, that elected body, do the job that they're supposed to do, and that we don't try to take any of their money or any of their authority away or try to impose other things on them that we're not supposed to impose. So I've enjoyed being on that liaison to that board and seeing the strength that the school has come forward with to make sure that we each do our roles.
Thank you, Lorette. No response? We'll move on to code enforcement here. This question says, and it's for both of you, what is your stance on a proactive code enforcement policy versus a reactive policy that requires citizens' complaints before any action is taken by our city code enforcement staff? Lorette, I'd like to start with you on this one.
I don't understand where the concept of proactive and reactive ever came. This happened prior to my being on council, and the city manager made the comment that the previous council had decided on a reactive stance. At no time is any law ever required that the only way we enforce it is if you complain about it. If I go 50 down the street, one of you don't call on me. A police officer says you're going 50 and gives me a ticket. So code enforcement needs to be the same. Those are our laws. We are only 6.5 square miles. We have 5 code enforcement officers, and they need to make sure that they are doing the best job they can. If you divide it by the 4 and a supervisor, that's still less than 2 square miles per code enforcement officer. They need to be enforcing the law because it puts neighbors in difficult positions when they are asked to go ahead and be the one complaining on their neighbor. So I think that we want to make sure that we have an open process so that if you want to file a complaint that you can. But for the most part, the vast majority of code enforcement ought to be handled in a proactive way from them driving around the community and knowing what's going on in their community in their little 2 square miles of the city.
Thank you. Joe, the question goes to you.
Yeah, Englewood doesn't have 4 code enforcement officers on at all times. They usually have 1 code enforcement officer and a supervisor that are on duty, and so that you can't split it up into little square mile sections and have them cover every block and alley of that. There's probably, I think, 150 miles of streets in our community. We do need to have a proactive code enforcement, and good news, we do. Our code enforcement is over 50% proactive. They're out finding problems. Most of their cases are proactive. I believe it's around 30% where it's reactive, which makes sense. People do call in and they do respond to those. So if we want to have if we want to have code enforcement that's doing more, we need to put more money into it. That's the only logical conclusion, right? If you want more enforcement, you need more people. And so if that's the way we want to go as a community, then it would require a lot. If we're going to enforce every weed on every alley, we're going to have an army of code enforcement officers. I don't think anybody wants that. I think we want a balanced approach. Code enforcement also has to deal with animal control. It has to deal with abatement of properties that have been abused or condemned. Code enforcement has meth houses. These happen in our community. Houses where they're raising animals. There's recently a home where they had hundreds and hundreds of rats and a couple dozen snakes that they were raising to sell. Code enforcement deals with that, okay? So if you wonder why code enforcement isn't enforcing every alley and every weed on every alley, it's they simply don't have time. The other thing is code enforcement, it takes a long time for the code enforcement process to work. Code enforcement does not issue citations. Code enforcement issues warnings. You get a first warning, 7 days, a second warning, 14 days. Then it goes to the municipal court to enforce, and that usually takes 6 months. So if you put in a code enforcement complaint and you don't see immediate action, it's because the process is really long. Best thing you can do is we need to have a balanced approach. I'm not opposed to adding 1 or 2 more code enforcement officers if that's what we think is the best way to spend our money, but we need to balance it with a community that really cares for and knows its neighbors. We don't want to be calling on our elderly neighbors who aren't able to get out and do their weeds. We need to be out helping them with that. So this is a whole community issue. Englewood is not an HOA. Code enforcement is not the Gestapo. So we need a balanced approach to this issue. Adding a couple code enforcement officers wouldn't hurt, but we need to get to know our neighbors really well and help them out when needed.
Thank you, Joe.
Can I respond?
You may.
We just added another code enforcement officer, and the city is divided by code enforcement officer. Each officer is assigned an area. So I didn't mean to imply that they were all working all of the time, but they are designated for their area. When I originally purchased my house here in Englewood, we actually had the same amount of officers, and they did a very good job in being very proactive in what they were doing. Where the proactive piece came was actually very recently. I think that they were very effective then, and I don't think we'd actually need to add more officers to go back to that kind of enforcement. So I think a little bit of scrutiny on how we're using the new officer and how they're using their time. Like they said, 95% of you guys comply the minute they put a notice on your door. It's the 5% that become the issues that they have to deal with, and I think we might need to just get a little bit more information on how we're using their time.
Thank you for your response. Joe, go ahead.
It has actually changed over the years. I believe that Englewood had 8 code enforcement officers in the 80s. So part of that is, and it's just like our streets crew. Our streets crew used to have 15 or 16. Now they're down to 5 people on our streets crew. So some of this is a funding and staffing issue, and can't be explained simply explained by the approach. I mean, you just can't get as much, can't expect them to do as much when there's only 4 when there used to be 8. So things are changing over time, and we need to decide what the priorities are on spending on those things.
Thank you. This is going to be our last question. I want to shift over to another question about infrastructure. I know I didn't get to every single question. I tried my best to ask questions that represented other questions. I will make sure that these candidates see all the questions so that they know some of the things that you were thinking about. But in the interest of time, I'd like for us to wrap up with this question. We're going to begin with Lorette. The question says, let me give a little bit of context for this. There's been a lot of conversation around infrastructure and our crumbling infrastructure and the problems of our infrastructure. I think what that's creating in the city of Englewood is a little bit of a fear-based culture where we're afraid of everything falling apart and we're not going to have any money to fix it. I like this question because it asks you about some of the funding specifically on how we can fix our infrastructure so that we can all leave here with a little bit of a hopeful outlook rather than a bleak outlook on our infrastructure in the city. Here's the question. Some candidates are suggesting that there is grant money available for fixing our infrastructure. If you are aware of this or any other sources of money, rather than relying on property owners, please explain in detail how that money could be used to fix our infrastructure. Lorette, we'll start with you.
We're looking at all the funding right now. There's grants that are available through urban drainage, so I'm not sure what grants they're talking about. We are looking at all of the available funding, including increasing the tap fees so that developers pay more money. That's part of how we found out Littleton garnered $27 million reserve, was that they were charging a lot more in their tap fees for impact fees for the development. There are a lot of other vehicles that we can use to go ahead and bring in funds. They are hiring an outside firm to do exactly that, to look at what the funding bonds or issues and how we would fund the infrastructure.
When you say they, do you mean council?
With staff. That's
Staff,
the
okay.
recommendation from staff in this budget piece of it. So if our current staff, which I have a great deal of respect for and work well with, if they're coming to us saying that they would like to have some outside information on some unique ways to kind of help fund all of the different sections. It's not just infrastructure like it's a building. It's infrastructure like a bridge, like the roads, like the storm drainage, like the sewer, like the water pipes. They're all different and come with a little bit of different expertise and different fundings and different grant vehicles that might be available because they're all different sources. It's not just one source.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, there's a variety of sources of funding for these things, but the city pays for most of it, especially over the next 25 or 30 years. Again, when I say city, I'm saying that what we generate in terms of wealth in our city. So this is an underlying issue, right? There's tax rates that you can keep the same or increase or decrease. That's one approach to funding. An underlying approach is to build a stronger financial base from which that money at the tax level is being drawn on. And in the long run, that's where the problem is going to be solved. It's not going to be solved by increasing taxes a little bit. It would be impossible to increase property taxes enough to pay for our long-term infrastructure problems with our current tax approach. We would have to generate a more vibrant business environment because the vast majority of our income comes from sales tax revenue. So what we need to do is make Englewood the best place to start and grow a small business, and especially on this section of Englewood Parkway between Broadway all the way down to the light rail station. There's going to be tons of opportunity for business growth along there, and I want to see us take really careful stewardship of that, because that's how we're going to pay for this, is to create a more wealthy city in the long run.
Thank you, Joe. Folks, that's going to conclude our event for the evening. I want to encourage you with a couple things. First of all, you were here, which matters. Thank you for being here. This doesn't have to be the only venue by which you get answers to these questions. You have heard the candidates agree on some things. You've heard the candidates disagree on some things. And my guess is some of you have maybe some other questions that you either didn't express or you developed as you were listening. These candidates have made themselves available to answer those questions both immediately afterwards, but I think throughout their campaign, that's what they want to do is talk to you about these things. So please be proactive in asking these candidates questions. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is to go and vote. This is an important election. All of them are important. It's important that we make our voices heard as citizens. And so please go and vote. Please encourage your friends and your family and your neighbors to go vote as well. It really matters that all of us have a voice in this. So before we adjourn, if all you would please give our two candidates a round of applause for all the work they put into tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have one more debate coming up in this series. It'll be next Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're going to put that information up on the screen. There's also cards around the room. Feel free to grab a couple and give them to friends and neighbors. We're looking forward to seeing you next week. Please grab some food on your way out. Thank you so much for being here tonight.